Hello, this is Jason Thomas. Today I am going to talk about Harrison Birtwistle, the British composer, later Sir Harrison Birtwistle, later in his life. I had some interactions back in the early 2000s, a couple lessons and a few other just social interactions, and I thought it would be interesting to do a video on Birtwistle, similar to the Thoughts on James Tinney video that I recently did. This is not a comprehensive overview of his work or his kind of place as a composer. This is just a few little thoughts that I have about him and some interesting things that I found about his music and him personally. Birtwistle did recently die, and that is kind of the catalyst for making this recording. So, as I mentioned, I studied with him when I was fairly young, over 20 years ago, very briefly. And this was before studying with Tinney and Subotnick. My kind of place as a composer at that point in time was not a place of coming from having a lot of work or having a strong knowledge of where I wanted to go yet at that point in time. This would have been in 2001, so I believe I was 23 at the time, and it was probably a good 3 years after that where I really went in the direction that I am still going today, with what would subsequently be referred to as subject music, and writing pieces in that vein. At this point in time, I was working on pieces that could probably be considered semi-modernist, very focused on harmonic organization, somewhat developmental. I hadn't gone in the direction that I would later go by any means. And so when I initially interacted with him, we talked about a lot of different things, because I think he knew, as is the case with most early 20-year-olds, that you're kind of a blank slate that could be going in a few different directions. He did not have an agenda. He was somebody I'm later in life, I've done my thing. I'm not promoting an ideology. Now, that being said, he had strong points of view on certain things and was not shy about stating them. But we were largely talking in the brief period of time about extra musical kind of aspects of his works, probably more so than me showing him anything that I was working on. I do remember one of the things that I initially showed him was something that I had written that started at a tempo marking of 32, and he really fixated on that because he had ended at 32 in one of his other recent pieces. I wish I could remember which one it is, and he specifically commented on that. He's, that's not practical, and I don't know what degree of accuracy you're going to get. And I said, well, I'm kind of going for that, and I'm kind of going for the fog surrounding the fact that you're not likely to get accuracy with something that is kind of presented in that way. And he was a bigger fan of if you want something that sounds a particular way, notate it very specifically, rather than going for the vagary of a particular notation strategy and assuming that it will lead to the type of result that you want. So that was an interesting kind of point taken. I no longer claim that piece or even know if I still have a remaining copy of it, but it was an interesting kind of conversation starter. I also remember, because he had set a lot of songs in between his major operas recently, and he liked kind of being able to pop something off in a day, and some of the literary figures that he had an interest in were kind of a subject of conversation. I remember asking him if he had ever set Joyce. And I don't know why this was, actually I do know why this was in my mind, and I'll tell you in a moment why it was. But he said, no, that's yesterday's avant-garde. And I remember thinking, I remember being amused by this for some way, in some reason rather, thinking that, well, yes, I guess that is the case, but compared to what? I mean, compared to some of the things that other people are doing, one would not necessarily say that. But the now that I think of it, the thing that got us onto that conversation was a discussion of Anthony Burgess. Now, if that name does not sound familiar, he was a British author that wrote A Clockwork Orange that would later be filmed successfully by Stanley Kubrick, and also other books. Jesus of Nazareth, I believe the written version is called Man of Nazareth, and Honey for the Bears, a number of other novels. But he was known to have written music as a composer, I believe, at an amateur level at some point in time. And since we were kind of in the literary space, I had just asked, oh, have you ever heard any of Anthony Burgess's music? And he knew immediately who he was, and went off in kind of a tangent about apparently the reactionary politics of Burgess, which I'm not really qualified to comment on. I was not and am not still familiar with the British politics of that time period as related to a kind of literary figure's opinion of them. So that kind of went by the wayside, but we did talk about some of Burgess's writings about Joyce, and that's where the Joyce kind of situation came up. I wondered if he was influenced in some way by the stream of consciousness writers, perhaps some others, Stein or Faulkner or Plath or any other people that might have had an interest, since he was a modernist, certainly from the standpoint of what the results sounded like in many ways, but he was also interesting in the sense that he was not an exclusively process-based thinker or creator. He was happy to utilize kind of routine and ritual. And you can tell this by the subject matter of most of his well-known operatic works, Mask of Orpheus, Punch and Judy, King Arthur. So ritual is a big source of content for Birtwistle. He was an interesting guy. He would kind of thread a needle very effectively by jumping from a seemingly unrelated topic to something that he thought was very relevant in the piece that he was doing. I really appreciated my time. I think it was underutilized in the sense that, why is this, probably best at that point in time living opera composer of the 20th century, talking to some 23-year-old that doesn't know really, admittedly, what the hell he wants to do yet. And but I think in some ways there's some advantages to getting in front of someone that might have some interesting comments at that point in life rather than later on. I did not go in any direction that could even remotely be attributable to a Birtwistle influence from a sonic standpoint. But I think some of the conversations and contrasting them with other people that might be a little more directly related stylistically and methodologically to what I have done later on would probably show some type of influence. I think you don't always know where the influences in what you're doing come from, and sometimes it's a really weird spot and someplace that you're not even necessarily going to be able to come to a conclusion about, kind of like interpreting a dream of some kind. I mean, we can try to do it, but we're probably going to be unsuccessful on the way in. So those of you who are not familiar with Birtwistle's work, I would highly recommend. I mean, the operas are, without a doubt, in the conversation for the best works of the 20th century. If you haven't taken a listen to those yet, you might want to do that. But there's a lot of other material out there as well. He is I mentioned that Jim Tenney in my last video was kind of underappreciated relative to his status as a composer, in my opinion, because he's kind of gone in so many different directions that it's difficult to categorize him. Birtwistle was Birtwistle throughout his whole life. He didn't branch out in 50 different directions in the same way that Jim Tenney did, but he did have a particular style. The ritual combined with kind of a modernist aesthetic, which is a very interesting place to be from the standpoint of a listener and someone experiencing the work, but it's not necessarily something that allows a historian or musicologist to thread a narrative very easily. And you see this historically with a lot of people. Hector Berlioz would be an example of that, who is better as a composer than he is as a tool for someone to be able to make a historical point. And I think that is why he is probably less known than some of the other Europeans that are his contemporaries, despite being on their level, or in some cases, in my opinion, exceeding that level in the quality of output, which is just really over the moon in some capacity. So that being said, take a listen to Harrison Birtwistle's work. If you have not done so thus far, you are in for a treat. And I will see you in the next video. I think I might do a few of these thoughts on videos for people that I've had some tangential relationship with or influence throughout the course of my life, and just kind of give little nuggets here and there rather than large-scale overviews. But on that point, I do hope that someone who is a little more scholarly inclined does do an overview of the work of Birtwistle and his life, now that he is no longer with us, because the work definitely deserves it. So I'll look forward to speaking about future people in the next upcoming videos, and thanks for listening thus far. Thanks.